Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you for joining us. It's been a very long peace week, and we're very happy today to have my three colleagues from Ukraine. And on Monday, we started Peace Week with a session which discussed more political, geopolitical issues and responses of ordinary Ukrainians for survey about Ukraine. Today, we have a very important report which was developed by participants on this panel. And this report discussed responses to Russian invasion from the civic society, from peace building activities. I'm very happy today to have Tetiana Kyselova, and every participant will introduce themselves. I just want to say a few words, who is long time friend and very esteemed colleague who done a lot. Basically, she is one of the most important people on dialogue in Ukraine, conducting a lot of research from academic standpoint, but also contributing to it. Tetiana Kalenychenko, who done a lot of work, also working with religious leaders, with civic society, and we have Natalia Bezhlibna, who also done a lot of work on civic society actors. So all three of participants today are the key for peace building activities, key for civic society responses. And while we discussing every day new development, very disturbing development in a military and geopolitical level, it's really great that our school can host this event which show how civic society respond to war and invasion in Ukraine. So I will ask participants to introduce themselves because they will be recorded on for recording. So please, let's start with Tetiana Kyselova.
Hello, my name is Tetiana Kyselova.
Kyselova, sorry.
That's my sound differently.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for having us today here. I'm an associate professor at Kyiv-Mohyla Academy in Kyiv, Ukraine. I'm also a director of the Mediation and Dialogue Research Center, which is a small research center under the same university. And currently, I'm also senior researcher at Swiss Peace in Switzerland.
Tetiana.
Hello to everyone. I'm Tetiana Kalenychenko. And I'm a sociologist of religion and in the same time a dialogue facilitator and trainer in the field. I'm executive director of European Center for Strategic Analytics and coordinator of Dialogue and Action Initiative. Nice to see you all here and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Natalia.
Yeah, nice to meet you all. And my name is Natalia Bezhlibna. I am mediator and I'm facilitator, I'm dialogue facilitator, and I am also trainer for those stuff. And also starting from March of this year, I'm coordinating a project on mobile teams of Mediator and Psychologists. And I will tell you a bit more about this project today. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So how we expect, we will first ask our participant to present report and specific examples of their activities. And after that, we will open it for questions, for discussions. We really hope to have very engaged discussion with participants today. Thank you. Tetiana, you are the first, right? Tetiana. Okay.
Yeah, now you can see the slides. Yeah, thank you very much. So today we would like to present results of the research which was done back in May and June this year as a very quick response of 4 experts on dialogue and peace building in Ukraine to the invasion of Russia, which happened in February. And what we wanted to do is this report, we wanted to look at specific responses of Ukrainian civil society from the very grassroots level to the current invasion and the ways of mobilization of civil society. This study The study specifically wanted to address the gap between local and international levels, which was already quite evident to us back in April and May. The thing is that possibly for the first time in the history of modern wars, the civil society on the ground in a conflict zone mobilized itself to unprecedented levels. And this horizontal mobilization in Ukraine became a basis to give the first response to the invasion. A lot of experts now believe that if not civil society and civil society working in tandem with the government and the army, Ukraine could possibly have fallen indeed in 3 days, but this didn't happen. So on the one side, we have this unprecedented horizontal mobilization, but we also have the level of international organizations and donors who are willing to support, but there is the obvious disconnect between these two levels. So we wanted international level to be aware of what's going on at the grassroots level and to trace the major trends. Specifically, we wanted to look at the major actors, both organized and spontaneous. A very important feature of conflict response in Ukraine was that a lot of civil society response was unorganized. That basically means a neighbor and another neighbor came together and formed an informal group which helped to evacuate other neighbors or to bring humanitarian aid into the village, which was under the siege. And we don't even know how many of these initiatives emerged. There is no statistics, of course, but we at least tried to have some snapshot of these activities. So we look at the activities, but we also looked at the risks and potential problems that this mobilization movement can have when we talk of a longer period of war. The report is aimed to address internationals, organizations, and NGOs and donor agencies and individual consultants. So all those whom we saw at the international level, but we also thought that this report would be useful for Ukrainian authorities and an expert community. We collected data from open sources. We conducted 12 semi-structured interviews with experts, but what was more important, the 4 authors, which is myself, Tetiana Kalenychenko, Maxim Yugulashvili, and Irina Ehelson, they were both experts, but also part of that civil society response. Some of the co-authors were those neighbors, in fact, who evacuated other neighbors in Bucha and in Kyiv Oblast. So there was a lot of, as we call, participant observation, but really personal experience of co-authors. We got support for this very quick research from the EU-sponsored project, a National Platform for Resilience and Social Cohesion, which was implemented by CMI Marty Artisari Peace Foundation. So that's the general map of Ukraine by July 2022, when we began to present this report in public. What we did, because the civil society response is very much contingent upon the context, the territories, And obviously, the type of response at the occupied territories is different from the type of response at the territories which are not occupied or which are far away from the front line. We had to separate the territories for analysis into 5 different categories. So these are, in red, are temporarily occupied territories. The map has obviously changed by now. We are all very, very happy that that part on the north east is now liberated, but this is a map for July. Then there is a combat zone, the zone of very active military actions. Then there are territories controlled by the Ukrainian government, blue color, and they're most of the territory. Territories which are liberated by the Ukrainian army, which is yellow, but now there is more yellow. And finally, that's very interesting. What actually happened to Ukrainian civil society after February 22, it went beyond Ukrainian borders. We all know that there are at least 7 million of displaced Ukrainians now living in the countries of European Union and other countries. Part of civil society also has left Ukraine, but has not abandoned their activities. They physically moved to different countries, but they do contribute to this overall mobilization of civil society. So we looked at these territories and we looked at specific practices. 10 practices that we identified. This is not exhaustive list. There are, of course, many other practices, but we picked up this one because we thought that they are they're contributing to potential peace building activities in Ukraine. Number one is nonviolent resistance, which is, of course, very much spread at the occupied territories and nowhere else. But this is a very important part of Ukraine withstanding Russian aggression. Different non-violent ways how Ukrainians under occupation resist Russian army, from protests and demonstrations in the very first weeks, which was suppressed, to silent protests, to graffiti on the streets, to different types of sabotage, and when people disagree, to cooperate with occupation authorities, spread information, give information to the outside world how things are working at the occupied territories. This is all under nonviolent resistance. Then we looked at one practice, local negotiations with the Russian army. This is a very sensitive practice. This is also why we do not publish this report. These are the practices of response to the conflict, but these are also practices of survival. So basically, people at occupied territories had to negotiate with the Russian military to save their lives, to save lives of their neighbors. And there were certain practices within under this label. Shelters, this is practice which is more spread much widely, also within Ukraine and abroad. This is organization of shelters for displaced people. Evacuation was another type of very distant practice. Evacuation was developed spontaneously at all territories, except abroad territories, of course. Humanitarian aid, this is clear, but what is interesting, we had humanitarian aid and aid to Ukrainian military units separately. In Ukraine, it is important to understand that in people's mind, army is not separate from the people. Army is people, and people are army. Relatives, friends serve in the army. People who remain at the Ukrainian-controlled territories, they continue helping army alone with the helping civilians. And very often the same account of one NGO would send money to civilians and to the military. This is not separated in Ukraine. Another very interesting and very new practice was integration of psychosocial support and conflict management support, but this is what Natalia Bezhlibna will tell more. Educational services, when you have millions of children displaced, the second question after where they live would be where they study. And there was enormous movement of Ukrainian civil society to provide these educational services when the formal educational system has collapsed. Art became a very important part of resistance and response. Documentation of war crimes is another very huge area with thousands of NGOs working there, and aid to Ukrainian military units, I told already. So this is a snapshot of all the practices, but what we want to present now in more details were the trends, overall picture, and conclusion and recommendations. So the first group of recommendations is the need to support local network, which is quite an obvious recommendation, but given the massive response of Ukrainian civil society, of both organized civil society, NGOs, and people-to-people help, the need to support these networks is also massive. And sometimes international organizations, or honestly quite often, come in and they use the same patterns or the same blueprints as they used in peaceful times. So that means to support local civil society, they need to come in to do some feasibility study, to do needs assessment, to do lots of bureaucracy, to strategize, to develop a theory of change, and then maybe to support civil society. Well, we do not say that all of this is not important, but the system has reacted naturally itself. This is a unique situation when you have the system which reacted within days and continues to adjust itself. So NGOs and volunteers who are working on the ground, they change within days and react to all the needs of Ukrainian army and Ukrainian civic population. So what is actually needed in this situation from internationals is to come in, to identify those networks and to support them. And we would claim here for much stronger local ownership than usual. We suggest that these networks should preserve their nature, their structures, operating models, logic, everything. And internationals just, insert or invest financial support and follow the routes suggested by local networks. We also suggest that an important part of Ukrainian recovery may be professionalization of and institutionalization of networks. So all those volunteers who are working for free on the ground, if they are supported, they can form NGOs, and we actually see this happening. So the more NGOs are registered now, and people change their professional occupation, and they do things which are needed now, while a lot of people lost their jobs. So by helping them to professionalize, we can create very important jobs for Ukraine and also help to sustain economically. And another important aspect of supporting local networks is providing psychosocial support. Basically meaning that helpers need help themselves. Those thousands and I don't know, millions of volunteers, they are currently burnt out. They have been working non-stop for 6 months without money or support. They really burnt out also psychologically. They need help, they need retreats, proper retreats, rest and recuperation. They need themselves psychological assistance, otherwise they will collapse. Yeah, and then when helpers collapse, who will help the people? That's it, I'm done. Then I give the floor to Tetiana.
Yeah, thank you so much. To next slide, please. And just to react on what you said, I would say that volunteers and civil society networks reacted not within days, but within hours sometimes. And it was really the fastest reaction, I should say. And just to add more about networks, we've got some professional already people who worked a lot in 2014, and now we've got much more new networks, some of them renewed from 2014, and who was working till all those 8 years of active armed conflict. So we also see a need to improve coordination. What do we mean by that? As soon as Tetiana told you about really strong network and developed networks of different specifics in different spheres, we also see the need in coordinating not only those local actors, but in coordination with donors, international actors, and government. And the main reason and difference we've got from in comparison to 2014 and 2022 is that now all volunteers, especially military volunteers, are in cooperation with the state. So they really have a big level of trust and high level of trust, and they cooperate with Ministry of Defense, with different military forces officially, with signed memorandums, and they are ready to support them because they trust the government, they trust the State Department, although there are some NGOs who are active in human rights, and they are still trying to control the state activities, some projects of laws, but it doesn't damage the process overall. So the system works as it should be. So civil society really understands the needs on a grassroots level. They understand how it could be done, and they use in their horizontal networks, but they also work on this vertical cooperation with the state and the real grassroots with people who need support. And of course, if we're talking about international support, from my side, for all those years, I see a huge need to coordinate. And as Tetiana mentioned about local ownership, that's really important, not only to empower this local ownership, but also to listen and to hear local recommendations. As soon as we've got those networks, it's really possible to enter the country or the region with your project. As for example, now we've got a lot of trauma, coping, psychosocial support trainings, and it's possible to find already those people in networks who are doing it and who are ready to get more professional education. So we don't need to invent new networks. We just need to support and to coordinate ourselves in what we're already doing. Also, of course, it's important to improve collaboration within communities, like territorial communities, local hromadas, if we're talking in Ukrainian, as well as between those regions, hromadas, and national structures. It's done partly, and we've got several platforms for that, but still it's important to connect people. And this is part of our dialogue facilitation work, which we were doing for 8 years already. And also, of course, what is really important, and it's more for future and strategic peace building in several years, it's to keep civil society as civic organizations and not to take over responsibilities of the government. Of course, now in really crisis times, we have a lot of support from volunteers. But then, as Tetiana mentioned already, we need to institutionalize those professionals to make them real professional and experts in their spheres, and to keep going with the system when government is taken by themselves the responsibility for social support, and they really working as it should be. Next slide, please. And also just to add, it's a really classical example about humanitarian aid and emergency response if we take into account conflict sensitivity and do no harm approach, but still that's a problem. And especially as soon as this report was done in the springtime, we still see those problems where peace building and other humanitarian actors internationally got in other countries, in other war and conflict zones. So as I just saw in my own example in Kyiv region, there were several big international organizations who were not coordinating themselves, and of course even didn't know about national and local leaders who already get this coordination network and contacts among different local people who were in need, and they just entered really rural areas. But they stopped, for example, in the center of the city, of the village, and they started to spread products, some money, some clothes, and they didn't ask from the very beginning what people need. For example, they didn't need clothes, but they needed products and medicine, vice versa. There were no coordination in the very beginning. And what was a real problem? Because local networks and those territorial communities had already the list of people who stayed during the occupation or during the shellings, and they were knowing who exactly, which family, how many people were in need for something. And that's actually what we see, and one of our strongest recommendations to transform this emergency response, because it's not like typical model when you can take those examples from other countries and to do the same in Ukraine. It's really important to coordinate among internationals and with local initiatives, as well as the government, because they know those civil society representatives who are really working and who can help. Also, of course, that's important to address issues not only about humanitarian aid, but about development. Of course, it's not only about military crisis, but about economical crisis and social, psychosocial support. So, for example, it's really important not also to take some products and medicine to people, but also to help them to find some workplaces, to restore their small and medium businesses, to start again to create some job places, to support families, to find some educational possibilities. And it's possible even now. So it's really important not to focus only on the basic needs, but also to think in a long-term perspective. So how it's possible to stabilize the system in preparation for winter period of time and for another struggles coming on the front line. And of course, there is a need to be aware about social disability, like aid dependency among people, because if in 2014 it was like new something in Donetsk, Lugansk region, and people get used to some humanitarian aid only in 1 year or half a year, now it could be done in 1 week. For example, that people just get used that they can get their products, their money from somewhere, and they're not ready to work. But now it's not the case. So we're just trying to refocus ourselves on creating job opportunities and to empower local development, but not to force only basic needs and humanitarian aid. And Tetiana, I think that we are coming to the next, and that's your part.
Yeah, thank you very much. I continue the increasing level of trust of civil society towards Ukrainian government has been already mentioned. One specific aspect, what actually we observed during these 6 months is natural debureaucratization. So in an urgent situation when people's lives are at stake, bureaucracy just gave up, and very quickly something which needed, I don't know, 10 signatures in peaceful time needed only 1 signature or no signature, and papers went through the system as quick as it was possible. So there were routes to debureaucratize the system. We suggest that this can be used for further reform of public administration. The need, also the trust among civil society has dramatically increased in situation of survival. This slide was initially to be presented by another co-author, Maxim Yogulashvili, and he has one very, very interesting case, which I try to recall. The case of evacuation of LGBT activists from occupied regions in the southern part of Ukraine, which was immediately occupied in the first weeks of the war. There were a lot of activists who didn't manage to escape, and Russian military had already lists of these activists. They were actually targeting them, especially LGBT people and LGBT activists. So they were in their need of evacuation, and there was a threat to their lives. And evacuation operation, so to say, for these people was done through the help, financial help of a foreign NGO who, as I understand, was from the Muslim country, supporting LGBT activists to evacuate. But the most interesting thing was who physically evacuated them, and physically it was Orthodox priest who was living in these territories, and before the war he really disliked LGBT people for obvious reason, because he was also Orthodox priest by Moscow Patriarchy. But in the acute situation of a threat to life, nothing else mattered, only life. So what he did, he put on his black gown, cross, got into his car, got this LGBT activists and managed to go through the checkpoints. So that was one story, how all civil society came together, irrespective of religious beliefs, previous political struggles or anything else. So if we manage to support this level of horizontal and vertical trust, this would be a real gain for Ukraine, but it's difficult. Going further, international organizations and the trust issues with international organizations, here it's actually vice versa. So the way how international organizations reacted to the conflict was perceived quite negatively by Ukrainians. So large multilateral organizations really had problems also in between international and local staff. Local staff wasn't treated adequately in terms of evacuation and communication in the first days. Also, big international organizations were expected to react quickly because we also know that they had contingency plans half a year before. how seriously these plans were treated, we don't know. But while Ukrainian civil society reacted in hours, internationals reacted in months. And then there was, of course, an issue of so-called neutrality by of UN or International Red Cross Committee. So there were quite a lot of disillusionment among Ukrainian civil society about international organizations. So what we suggest, of course, we cannot survive and work without the help of internationals, but the trust has to be restored. Some issues have to be investigated because some stories were really not good. The mandates of international organizations actually need to be more discussed, or people on the ground have to know about a lot of restrictions that internationals have, but international organizations really failed on communication side. They didn't communicate anything. So the first month was just silence. There was such a panic there that nothing was communicated. And another very painful thing is bureaucracy. As I said already, emergency response is emergency response. Ukrainians expected donors to react within, okay, not hours, but weeks. They reacted differently. We don't have research, but there were several cases when donors didn't allow locals to restructure their existing project to take the funds for the humanitarian aid and so on. So this has to be somehow fixed. Tetiana?
Yeah, that's my part. And also just recently, of course, we can observe the same issue of trust for internationals on the level of the United Nations. And just today I saw a petition from Ukrainian side to UN about distrust and just aiming to change something and to change the status of UN and their decision making. So it's really, I would say, one of the cases of rethinking the international system and understanding how it could be better and how it could react to real issues on the ground. So the issue of polarizations, it's not only about polarization on political views, but there are also several labels which unfortunately we see in Ukraine right now. And of course, it was caused by evacuation, different level of security and safety, and also on understanding how those cultural identities, political identities, regional identities clash. And of course, Ukrainian population was under imminent stress for a lot of years since their independence. Now for 8 years of war in Donbass, and now more than 6 months again in ongoing threat almost in every city and every village in Ukraine. And there are some high risks in Western Ukraine where large internally displaced people are hosted. And of course, there were several local conflicts, but Natalia will definitely tell more about it. And also there's a need to recognize those internal issues and to work with them, but also to recognize polarization which was remained unattended before the war started. And it could be unattended by the government and mainstream civil society even now. So that's more about our awareness of what's going on and to understanding and defining those lines of polarization and understanding where could be the better possibilities to change it and what's our pillars for new identity after the end of the war and how we can call for identity for multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnical country. So it's not like that means that we are just monochrome country, but we need to understand what does it mean to be Ukrainian even now. And of course, it's a long-term process with all the history, trauma, and together with our neighboring countries. So we're just in the beginning, but of course, we've got a tremendous, it can be for the next slide, thanks. And just about this picture, 2 words before, as we mentioned already, that's the highest level of trust we see now in the army, in the government, in our civil society actors. And it's really important just to use this potential. And it's possible to create new lines of connections, but not divisions. And of course, it could be done in parallel, and it should be done together with psychological support and peace building approaches. By peace building, we mean now not only like peace negotiations, which are not working anymore in our case, but more about internal peace building, like focused on reconnecting society, on finding new points of connections, and also to empower those unique practices, traditions, and responses, which we already have been doing for 8 years. Because the level of social cohesion, especially after decentralization reform, which was taking part in different regions of Ukraine, it was empowered so much by different dialogue initiatives and peace building initiatives. And it's really important to keep going. But one of the issues, of course, it's our mental health and trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, collective trauma, and approach in conflict management and restorative practices that should be taken into account in this recovery approach. Of course, we've got those strong volunteers network that are in urgent need in help, and they do not get any kind of chance even to stop their activity because a lot of people are given a responsibility to them, but there is a huge need, as Tetiana already mentioned, to support those practitioners who are unique sometimes and who already in deep need on psychological support. And of course, we will get another wave of needs, and we'll get it even now for veterans families and for those families who were damaged and injured by the war, who lost their relatives, their friends, and even those people who just observed a war from their screens of mobile phones or laptops. They could be also traumatized because of moral issues and also their understanding of how they could live in a new world and in such cruel world sometimes. And of course, I would be happy to pass my word to Natalia Bezhlibna, who will tell more about really unique practical project we have been doing for several months already.
Thank you, Tetiana. Just let me,
Yeah, while Natalia is connecting her PowerPoints, we wanted to give one case study of the specific practices which we identify on the ground, one of these 10 that I mentioned, and that is integration of mediation and conflict resolution services with mental health and psychosocial support.
Thank you, Tetiana.
Natalia, are you able to connect?
Yeah, I just wanted to check whether Tetiana wanted to add something or not. Okay, just let me switch. Oh my God. Let me switch to focus right up. Okay. So I would like to share with you our experience in one particular project. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that is still in progress. And the first part of it, the first so-called season, we had from the middle of spring till the middle of summer this year. Sorry. And it was 3 months, and it was and it is still in 4 cities in west of Ukraine. It's Lviv, Chernivtsi, Ivano-Frankivsk, and Ternopil. And what is this all about? So, as Tetiana already said, we have a project that emphasize and focus on working with conflict tension, through helping people to manage their conflicts and to manage their psychological issues. So we have in each city one mobile team, and this mobile team consists of mediator and psychologist. What I'm thinking now is that I will tell you about these first 3 months, because now we started another season, another 3 months of this project, and we, with colleague, we slightly changed some approaches and methodology, but the overall and the general impression about this project could be caught as well based on what I will tell you. So what we did and how all this worked. I will tell you about now about general frame, like who involved, what we're doing, and then I will tell you more about some peculiarities and then the outcomes of those 3 months. So what was next? As I told you, we have 4 teams. Except those 4 teams, we also have methodological team. Those are people who are like think tank of this project. So I also belong to methodological team, and I am a coordinator of this project, so I have 2 hats. And I also have my colleagues in methodological team, and with them together, starting from the March of this year, we worked out the methodology of work of such mobile teams. Frankly speaking, this, I can say so, I'm coordinator, so this project is really unique because we are doing peace building efforts during the hot phase of the conflict. Of course, we are not on the front line. We are like in west of Ukraine, which is like more safe place, if you may say so, in about any part of Ukraine now. But we are working with this conflict tension already. We are not waiting till everything will be settled with this hot phase of the conflict. So as methodological team, we are think tanks that work on methodology, on finding proper expert for those teams, onboarding them, preparing every and all staff that will help them to work. And also we were in charge of like working out what should be the tasks of those mobile teams. So what this focus and what's the focus of the project and how we do it, what we as methodological team, what approach we choose to make all this happen. So as I already told you, focus of this conflict is conflict tension. And this conflict tension mainly associated with IDPs and host communities. Just very simple, like when you have a city where you have 1 million of citizens, and then just in few days, it became like 2 million or even more. So all the conflict tension that will be associated with this change, and this change happened not just for a day or 2, it happened. It's already in progress for 6 months, and it unfortunately, we will see that it will still take some time. So we understand very good that in such situations, conflicts may appear and conflict tension will arise. So we are working with prevention of the conflicts. We are working with intervention in the conflicts, and we are working with post-conflicts because we understand that post-conflict doesn't mean that the conflict is resolved. We, in this project, we call our colleagues in mobile team treat locations as systems. What do we mean under this? It's like when they come to location, and just in a second I will tell you what we mean under location, but usually it's, for example, shelter. So once mobile team come to the location, they see that there at different locations may be different issues. At some locations, there might be a lot of conflicts just because the administration didn't have time to set the rules for a long time. And there are a lot of conflicts, like when who is in charge of what, and how should the overall living will be organized at this location. Or they may come to location and see that volunteers that are working in this location, they have some issues with the communication between them and so on. So locations are like systems, and one of the primary tasks of mobile teams was to analyze, to observe and analyze what are the primarily issues, what are the primarily problems of every and each location, because they all need tailor-made approach. So what will be good for one location will not definitely work for another location. So we need to be very, very flexible at this point. And like a cherry on top is background conflict, meaning that, of course, we all understand that we have war in Ukraine, we have this full-scale invasion, and there is a lot of psychological and other tension coming from that stuff. It's one point, and the other point that there are, as my colleagues already mentioned, there are some points that are now very discussable in Ukraine, for example, language question or other stuff. And those are also arising, and those are also sources of the conflict. But we are also aware that like language problem couldn't be solved within one shelter. So we couldn't ask mobile teams just to, okay, work with shelter and through this solve this conflict. No, but we need to work with conflict shelter in order not to make this conflict tension to go up, yeah, and to be increased. When we speak about, okay, moment, I'll check time. Okay, I will go quickly. When we speak about locations, what do we mean under locations in the projects? It's shelters, it's humanitarian hubs or volunteer hubs, any place where there are volunteers helping people. So we do not deem as locations for our projects those volunteers who are, for example, organizing humanitarian aid. They're also we also admire their work, but for us, the primary goal, those who are working with people, working with IDPs. And also at the beginning, we treat as locations place of transit, but frankly speaking, now we understand that shelter, humanitarian hubs, and other locations, I will tell you more about just in a minute, are like more preferable stuff. And the target audiences, of course, it's IDPs, it's volunteers, and location administrations, because sometimes they also need some support and some help. When we speak about main tasks of mobile teams, we see that they are in charge of building contact with locations and assessing what are the needs and what is the conflict potential at locations. We ask them to work with conflict prevention activities. For example, those may be like some educational activities on conflict-related and psychological-related topics. There might be like setting the rules at any location, and that also can be a tool for conflict prevention. We also ask them to do some psychological consultations, but we are speaking about this crisis consultation, so it's not therapy. And we are speaking with them about assistance in conflict identification and resolution as a primary goal. What we observed during these 3 months. First, I told you at the beginning, we have 4 cities. Those are all in the west of Ukraine, but they are different cities. They have different dynamics, which means that each mobile team has its own way of doing this thing. Other things that mobile teams had flexibility to broaden the locations and target audiences, which means that if they see that some location, for example, center where people come to have to get administration services, if they see that this location also worth working with it and it will help to reduce the conflict tension, yes, they may do this. If they see that they should include some other target audiences like workers of this center for administration services, yes, they are welcome to do this. So, and that gave us as methodological team broader perspective where what we deem as this main task, where except those locations that we indicated at the beginning, where this also could be valuable and could be done. And one more issue is that when we speak about mobile teams, as I told you at the beginning, that we organize some we called it instructing sessions. So it's not trainings because we're already dealing with professionals, they know what to do. But we organize some instruction sessions at the beginning for them to better understand what they will likely to face when they will go in the field. And what we found out that also the mobile teams, they need continuous support in their work because sometimes the dynamic is changing or some new topics may pop up. So they need to be in touch with their colleagues and with methodological team to work better. So few figures just to give you a broader understanding what happened. So during it's typo months, 3 months of pilot, we managed to deal with mobile teams managed to deal with more than 2,800 people. And it's really like brilliant job because a lot of beneficiaries received help. They managed to work at more than 70 locations. And during this period, they managed to work with more than 1,600 IDPs and with more than 900 volunteers. Okay. There should be also some slide with main findings, but what I will also add on top of this, we found out that in this chain like administration, volunteers, and IDPs, volunteers appeared to be like maybe the key players, meaning that volunteers are those who are helping or in charge of helping IDPs. And if volunteers are burnt out, if there is some issues with their resourcefulness, or they are just not good in communication. Such stuff happens. They might be good people, they might be willing to help, but they may be like really bad in communication. So if they are not performing good in their communication, in how they help IDPs, it also have that effect that the conflict tension will increase. So what we found out that it's really important to work with volunteers to help them to understand themselves, to keep their resourcefulness high, and for them to be good communicators, which means that sometimes they will need some additional support with this stuff. So, but when they are really in a good condition, let's say so, their work really influence on how the IDPs feel themselves and whether the conflict tension within the IDPs communities will increase or decrease. So this is just to give you a brief understanding on what we are dealing with and how it works. Now we have like second season, we started to work with mobile teams in the same cities. For the next 3 months, we will work till autumn. We understood that now mobile teams, as they worked on grassroots level and they did really good job, now they are ready to go a bit level up and to work with stakeholders. So we decided that we want to involve the third person in each team, and this third person will be in charge of building the possible connection with stakeholders in order to mobile teams work on like level up on stakeholder levels to really help more people within Hromadas, within the communities, and to decrease the conflict tension at their territories. Okay, I think that is it. I'm done with my slides, and I will pass the word, I think, to Karina. And yeah, Karina, you are muted as well.
Sorry. Thank you very much. I will, because we have only 20 minutes left, I will oh, sorry. I will keep my notes for like 2 minutes, basically. So first of all, I want to share this deep respect and deep appreciation of all this work done, because it's unbelievable to see how Ukrainian civic society stand up, and it started with 2014 invasion, but now we're clearly seeing how it's become very, as Tetiana told in the beginning, very strong force together with the government. So we also see how this work and how this report contribute to entire theory and practice of conflict resolution and can be applied across different settings, but also provide very strong practice recommendations, policy recommendations, what can be done. So just to list them, to leave more time for discussion, first of all, we really see strong interface connections between resilience and conflict resolution study. Second is it's really supporting this new development in this year of conflict resolution to local turn and production of local knowledge and the importance in supporting programs. We also see very important new development, which is, again, comes in our field, and it's clearly come from the report that it's strong need to support conflict resolution professionals, their mental health, but also supporting them through new practices, new ideas, multi-layered trauma healing on different levels, from conflict resolution professionals themselves, through education, through civic society, because we know that people who are affected by trauma, it's affects their not also mental stage and not their health, but also the ability to rebuild society, which a lot of research shows. Addressing division recommendations in the midst of conflict. It's very important because we see this forced homogenization of societies in many conflict settings, and it is great that it's stressed in the report. And the last one, we speak about multicultural, religious identity, and what I see it's also emerging, it's really much more interest in civic meaning of national identity, which is really can be built on it. And it's also came up in research which we just done in Eastern Ukraine, that people have increasing meaning of civic identity. I will stop here. Again, I really want to give more space for questions and answers, but this is very, very good work, and I believe we can popularize and work more with it as much as possible, especially for political implications. So let's open, we have 15 minutes, let's open it for questions. And I have a lot of questions and suggestions, but I want to open it for the group. While people are thinking, then I really want to ask this one question, and we'll see about the civic meaning of national identity. So how do you see like all the civic activities, civic society activities, raise of civic awareness and participation, how do you see this future development, what Ukraine is? And by civic meaning of national identity, I mean liberal European meaning, where your ethnicity, language, religion does not matter, as soon as you're really strong supporter and loyal citizen of it's an equal citizenship which unite people together in the nation. So maybe a quick question for panelists.
Well, I can tell a few examples. So with the invasion, there were perhaps two very important aspects of this growing civic identity. Number one, the whole war began because someone in Russia wanted to exterminate Ukrainians. And the meaning of what it is to be Ukrainian also very much was pushed by this invasion. So if the war is against Ukraine and Ukrainians, then the only way to withstand this war is to become stronger and to become stronger Ukraine and stronger Ukrainians. That's why a lot of people also had to finally identify themselves, who they are, also in terms of their national identities and civic identities. And number two, citizens of Ukraine are not homogeneous. We have a lot of national minorities. We have Hungarians, Romanians, Bulgarians, a lot of Jews, Crimean Tatars, Russians, of course, and all others who had to decide for themselves that they are Ukrainians, and or if they didn't feel themselves Ukrainians, they also had a chance to behave differently. But a lot of them, especially Crimean Tatars, they feel themselves Ukrainians and have a possibility to retain their ethnic identity. And the government really promotes now this help to multiculturalism. For example, before the war, before the February invasion, the government adopted these several laws to promote minorities. The same is on other minorities, gender minorities, or generally aspects of women inclusion in Ukraine. It was very notable that already, I think in March, when it was full-scale invasion, the government finally ratified Istanbul Convention for women's rights, and that was another victory of human rights, another achievement on this front, because Ukraine never ever has to fight at one front. Ukraine also reforms itself towards democracy simultaneously with all the problems. So there are lots of movements, but there are lots of things to do as well. Yeah.
I would just rapidly add that it's really important to emphasize citizen identity. I would say that's not about national as in a part of ethnic or national, but citizen. So what does it mean to be a citizen? To pay taxes, to understand the court system, to approve human rights system and the rule of law, for example, and how it could be done in practice. And it's really important, I suggest, just to start from primary education on this level to understand what does it mean for me to be a citizen of Ukraine, and why I want to be him or her or other. So, and just as Tetiana mentioned, to be aware about history and history of different regions of Ukraine, and not blaming for someone to be more Ukrainian or less Ukrainian because of the complicated history of being under different empires, but also to be aware about different nationalities, religion, and cultures as we got them, and just to get more attached to it and to get known, but not to create any kind of cultural ghettos. And it could be in different other countries, but now it's a chance to really build new networks and new connections.
Thank you very much. Natalia, do you want to?
No, thanks. I think my colleague.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have a question. Susan, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, or I can read it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Sorry, I'm outdoors here with my hat on, but I'm really enjoying your share. Thank you so much for sharing all your experience and really rich discussion. And I want to thank you for the panel, first of all. Sorry, and my dog wants to thank you too. But my class, interpersonal conflict resolution class, some of them are online here. And so I wanted to ask, you were referring to the mobile teams and that work, if you could speak a bit to how, if at all, has the interpersonal conflicts that, any society has, neighbor conflicts or business conflicts, et cetera, how has that shifted at a time of war? With the Russian invasion, did some conflicts become not important because it's life and death? Or with the Russian invasion, did some conflicts become even worse because everyone's traumatized and fighting a war? So yeah, I wanted to ask you to speak a bit to how interpersonal conflict has changed during the time of war. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I think, colleagues, I can take it unless, Tetiana, you want to step in.
I will just add afterwards.
Okay. Then first, I would say that when you say about changes and whether something changed because of the full-scale invasion, I'm like, okay, I have some comments, but frankly speaking, we don't have like research on how it was before this invasion. So we can share just our subjective observations. And moreover, since I'm working with the project that is in 4 cities, I couldn't say that the picture would be the same for the whole Ukraine. But what I hear from mobile teams, and one more thing, mobile teams, some of them are IDPs and some of them are locals, which means that locals may know better about the situation before, but we never spoke with them about this. So we never asked them to, compare. But from judging from my own observations, is that when this full-scale invasion happened and people were in the first few weeks, there were a lot of people just fleeing from their place of where they usually live. Of course, when people fleeing, usually there is less conflicts because you have primary goal just to run. But on the other hand, if they happen, they will be like more active. They will go like blow. But it's first observation. The second observation, once people are more or less settled down, when their cycle is not running, then some conflicts might appear, and a lot of them at the beginning would be about their way of, because IDPs usually, they don't live like in separate flats. They live together in a gym, for example. Yeah, there are a lot of people and they live or in a school. So there like conflict based on household stuff, they might occur. And that might be from like theoretical point of view conflict theory, it will be like conflict over resources. And but then there are also more and more conflicts as people are staying longer with in these hosting communities or hosting places. There are other conflicts pop up, like some conflicts within even families or groups of close, let's say families, okay, whether to go back home, whether to move abroad, and so on. So there is some uncertainty that is the source of those conflicts. And also what we see and what we can say like now, those conflicts between locals and IDPs about the way of living, like when usually you walk your dog, it's like very, very, even funny question, but still some cities, they have their own practices. And if you are not following those practices, they will point you on that you are not in comply with what we are usually doing. And this also, it's like, it's minor cases, but they're all sources of this conflict tension. So it's like, I would say just in general that conflict changed a bit. The nature of them is changed. And the more people, the more time people spend like in their temporary places, the deeper. So we are now approaching more existential type of conflicts, like where we want, whether we want to stay in this country, whether we want to go back, whether we want to move to this city, or we want to go back to our usual city. So it's like when you have like your basic needs satisfied and everything, okay, you go to the needs of other levels, and the conflicts will get you on those levels as well, I would say so. So colleagues, whatever you want to add.
You said almost everything. Just to add more to existential conflicts. So it's really important not only so to think, are we moving or are we staying, but also why should we stay? So are we just attached because we're Ukrainians, or we want to stay because we want to get some work done or business back? So everything. So it's more why questions than before. And of course, the nature of the conflict, she changed rapidly, because before it could be done like war somewhere in Donbass or somewhere else, and now it can be at your home, and it's total difference. And also it's more about complicated identities, I would say, inside families. And for example, in my own, that it can be partly Russian, partly Ukrainian, partly other, and different political views inside one family. And it's sometimes really hard just to keep going with that. And also with relatives, not only like husband and wife and children, but more broad families in different regions. So that's two more aspects to add.
Yeah, one quick addition. We actually have one statistical observation. The divorce rates from March jumped 2 times. That basically means families are falling apart. And given that among those 6 or 7 millions who are now in Europe, they are mostly women and children, and husbands remain in Ukraine, you can imagine what's happening to the family relationships. We have a different project by family mediators who are working now on war-related family disputes, and it's a lot of work. And again, they are volunteers, they need support. This is one of another network which is working in this area.
Thank you very much. We have 2 minutes left, and I just want to give opportunity for every participant in our every presenter to give like one half minute speech, what you would like to really political support and financial support to be with, because this session, we really see this session as something which will create foundation for work with our school and with our colleagues to get additional projects, to develop support as much as we can for Ukraine. So what is your wish? What is your main wish where you think major development should be done?
I would start maybe, and just to quickly to keep aware about Ukrainian conflict and like not war in Ukraine actually, and to keep interested and to cooperate, because we are ready for that. To listen local partners, and just to be open for cooperation, because we really need our internationals to support. And also to exchange our experience, because we get something to give, and we are ready to accept a lot of information and resources. And thank you for that. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you.
Okay, I will emphasize 2 things. Number one, you all have the report in the chat. Feel free to download it, but please do not post it in the internet. It's semi-public in this respect. In terms of emphasis and how things have to be done, in Ukraine, we have a very unique situation when we as mediators simultaneously call for military aid to Ukraine. That may sound very unusual, but we do ask for more weapons to Ukraine, because if Ukraine does not withstand at the battleground, all our efforts that we are doing now in terms of interpersonal conflicts are useless. Ukraine has to be helped with weapons, military, and simultaneously with conflict resolution and work towards social cohesion and resilience inside the country.
Thank you very much. Natalia?
Yeah, I will. My thoughts are very similar to what my colleague said. I would say that we really appreciate the interests of being informed about what's happening here, and to be informed what's happening here actually, not like catching every and all propaganda that can be also on the news. And and we really appreciate your any kind of support. Sometimes we can't even imagine how it happened, but any kind of support that will lead to giving Ukraine more weapons, because whatever we are doing, we're doing it for our to make Ukraine win this in this situation, and we really understand that our efforts are really valuable, but the efforts of our military guys and girls are priceless. So please, whatever you do and whatever you can do, just help them to get more weapons. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And we will continue to support civic society, the peace building, reconciliation, the resilience efforts will continue. So this session is really, we'll see it as a foundation for our continuous work with Ukraine and support of Ukraine. Thank you very much. We a little bit over time, and thank you. And recording, as soon as recording available, we will be sharing it with everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you much. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.